My foster sister said video games triggered her childhood trauma, so my parents made me move my PS5 to the spider-infested garage, but I set up a camera after my controller went missing. My foster sister insisted I was poverty-shaming her rough childhood by playing video games, and our parents agreed. Nora had spent the first 13 years of her life raised in one of the worst crack houses in the city, but despite this, she actively claimed it didn't give her any sort of trauma or PTSD. Like, she was proud of coming out unaffected until one year, she found out my Christmas present was worth $14 more than hers. Suddenly, she was a broken victim with complex PTSD, and seeing younger kids get nice things activated her repressed memories. When my 10-year-old cousin got LED lights for her birthday, Nora broke the remote because her childhood had no light. She even told my aunt to stop buying her kids Christmas presents, then demanded our parents compensate her for what she never had with monthly surprise gifts. And when I got a PS5 with my own money, she said this was emotional violence. I first told her she could play too, even offered to buy her a custom-made controller, but she refused. Upon her request, my parents only let me play when she wasn't in the living room. I even used headphones, but that wasn't enough. Nora didn't feel safe walking around the house knowing her repressed trauma was being shoved in her face. Within a week, the PS5 was moved to my bedroom where the monitor ran at 30 FPS. That satisfied Nora for 2 days. I got home from school to find Mom cradling her on the bathroom floor. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. When she saw me, she started backing away like a mouse seeing a cat. 20 minutes of crying later, she opened up about how she caught a glimpse of the PS5 menu walking past my room. All those other kids, she sobbed. They had bedrooms, games. I had nothing. Mom somehow took a side. She looked at me like I was the one who raised her in the crack house. The new rules were immediate. 1 hour of PS5 max after 9 p.m. Only because that's when Nora goes to her room. Minimum TV brightness so the light doesn't shine through under the door for her to see. When I tried to protest, Dad said, "She's never had what you have. Are games worth destroying her recovery?" They made me feel like the bad guy. So for the next few weeks, I tried my hardest. I followed every rule and focused on just enjoying my games. But then Nora started documenting my violations, photos of the light under my door, claiming it gave her glimpses of what she missed, recordings of aggressive clicking of my controller from the hallway. After enough of these violations, my parents gave me a choice. Give the PlayStation 5 away or move it to the basement. I chose the basement. It had no heating and spiders dropping onto my head from the ceiling. The old TV had maybe 3 working pixels, but at least I could have my volume up and play for as long as I wanted. That's what they said until Nora failed her midterm. She'd been skipping class to hang out with college kids and smoke grass, but somehow failing was still my fault. She told our parents she could hear the PS5 through the floor during her study time, but decided to not say anything so I enjoy what she never had. My parents looked at her as a martyr. The next day, they moved my PlayStation 5 into our garage that hadn't been used in years. This way, it was impossible for Nora to hear. The garage was filled with opened paint cans from the 80s. Dead wasps, cockroaches, ants, insects science hasn't even discovered. That's where I spent my Saturdays as gaming was now again banned on weekdays. It stayed like that for 3 months. Nobody complained. But then Nora needed something from the garage. When she walked in, it triggered full-body tremors. She collapsed on the floor and needed help. That's when my parents decided they were done. The only possible solution was to sell the PlayStation 5. She can play mobile games, Nora said, still acting like Mother Teresa. That's what poor kids did. That's what I did. My parents nodded. Mom started looking up secondhand PS5s on eBay. That's when I snapped. Shut up. The words exploded out. I offered to share. I've done everything you asked. Nora played the victim again. I'm sorry I was poor. Okay, it's my fault I have trauma and my parents beat me. I'm such a failure. It's okay, Nori. Mom hugged her. Her face changed to a smile. She's going to sell the console, sweetie. Don't worry. I couldn't take it anymore. I'm done, I yelled. You want to see what your precious traumatized sweetie actually does? I pulled out my phone and connected it to the TV in the living room. I set up a camera after my controller went missing 4 weeks ago. Nora's face went white. She marched towards me, but her sudden reaction caught my parents' eye. What's going on, Nora? Dad said. Nothing. Every Sunday, I interrupted. When we're at church, Nora's been charging neighborhood kids $10 an hour to play my PS5. The footage started playing. There was Nora collecting money from the 2 quiet brothers from around the corner. Mom's mouth fell open. I'm not done. I swiped to the screenshots of Nora's texts. Don't worry, my foster parents believe anything if I cry. Dad stepped forward. Nora, is this, and isn't it such a coincidence? I interrupted. That the exact day these kids said they couldn't afford to pay her anymore is when she demanded I sell the PlayStation 5 completely. The room went silent. Nora was about to cry. Real tears this time. My parents were staring. The silence stretched on like someone had hit pause on the whole world. Nora's face kept changing expressions like she was scrolling through filters, trying to find the one that would save her. First confusion, then hurt, then that wounded puppy look that usually worked on Mom. The TV screen behind us still showed her text messages frozen in place. Those words about my foster parents believing anything if she cried. Mom's eyes darted between the screen and Nora, her mouth still hanging open like she couldn't process what she was seeing. Dad stood there with his arms crossed, that vein in his forehead starting to show the way it did when he got really mad. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and pointed at the screen. Nora, explain the money. His voice was quiet but but firm, like he was trying to hold back something bigger. Nora immediately straightened up and put on her concerned face. I was creating a safe space for those kids whose parents can't afford gaming systems. She looked right at Mom when she said it. You know how hard it is for poor families. Mom's shoulders dropped a little, and I could see her already buying it. So you were helping them? She asked, her voice soft again. Nora nodded quickly. They needed somewhere to play where they wouldn't feel judged. While they went back and forth about Nora's supposed charity work, I walked over to the TV stand and unplugged my PS5. I did it slowly, deliberately, the way you'd move around a sleeping animal you didn't fully trust. My hands were steadier than I expected, which surprised me because inside my chest everything felt like it was vibrating. The power cord came out with a satisfying click. That tiny sound, that clean little snap of plastic separating from plastic, was maybe the most control I'd felt in months. It was such a small thing, but it was mine. And for once, nobody could turn it into a story about Nora's childhood. Nora's eyes tracked my movement across the room, following the console the way a dog follows a plate of food being carried out of reach. She'd stopped mid-sentence. Whatever performance she'd been building for Mom had frozen halfway up her throat, and I could see her recalculating, trying to figure out whether to keep playing the wounded charity worker or switch to something that would stop me from walking off with the evidence machine tucked under my arm. When she started to say something, Dad held up his hand, not at me, at her. That was new. I noticed it immediately, the way you notice when a light flickers in a room that's always been perfectly lit. Dad almost never lifted a hand to slow Nora down. Usually he lifted it to slow me down, to give her space, to protect her recovery, to keep the peace that was never actually peaceful. But this time his palm was pointed at her, flat and firm, and the effect was instant. We need to pause everything and have a proper family discussion, he said, and his voice had that careful, measured weight to it, like he was standing on ice and trying not to hear it crack. I tucked the console under my arm, the plastic still warm from being on, and pulled out my phone. Right there in the middle of the living room, in front of all of them, I opened the PlayStation app and started changing every password I had. New password for the account, new password for the store, new PIN, so nobody could log in from another console and pretend it was theirs. My thumbs moved fast. I wasn't going to give Nora even a crack of an opening, not a single unlocked door she could slip through later and then cry that it had always secretly been half hers. I could feel her watching my screen from across the room, trying to read the characters as I typed them, and I angled my body so she couldn't. Nora took a step toward me. It was small, testing, the kind of step you take to see if the ground will hold, but Dad blocked her, just moved his shoulder into the space between us like a door swinging shut. Give her space, Nora. Mom looked between all of us, her eyes ticking back and forth like she was watching a tennis match she didn't understand the rules of, and then she announced in her teacher voice that nobody would be playing any games until we sorted this out as a family. She had this way of saying the word family that made it sound like a punishment instead of a comfort, like it was a room we were all locked in together. The unfairness of it burned in my chest, hot and tight, right behind the sternum where all the swallowed arguments seemed to collect. Nobody would be playing any games, as if I had ever been the problem, as if the footage on that TV, the money changing hands, the texts about how they'd believe anything if she cried, had somehow all been my doing. But I knew arguing would just make things worse. I'd learned that the hard way, over and over, every time I'd tried to explain myself and watched Mom fold my words into evidence against me. Arguing gave Nora oxygen. Arguing turned a fact into a fight, and Nora always won fights because Nora didn't care about being right, only about being pitied. So I nodded, just once, tight and quiet, and I headed for the stairs with my PS5 held against my ribs like something I'd rescued from a fire. "This isn't over," Nora called after me, and I heard the shift in her voice the second my back was turned, the tremble draining out of it, the real Nora leaking through the cracks in the character. It wasn't a plea anymore. It was a threat. In my room, I closed the door and leaned against it for a second, just breathing, the console still under my arm. Then I set it down carefully on my desk, opened my laptop, and started uploading everything. This was the part I'd been thinking about even before I walked downstairs. I knew that in this house, evidence had a way of vanishing. Photos got deleted by accident. Screenshots didn't send. Anything that made Nora look bad tended to evaporate the moment the adults weren't looking, so I wasn't going to keep a single copy of anything. The video files went to Google Drive first, and I watched the little progress bars crawl across the screen, refusing to close the lid until each one hit 100%, then Dropbox, then OneDrive. 3 different clouds, 3 different companies, because if one account got compromised or pressured or somehow talked out from under me, the others would still be standing. My hands shook a little as I created folder after folder, and I labeled every one of them with dates and descriptions so specific that no one could ever say I'd made it up or taken it out of context. Sunday collections, text messages, garage footage. I typed the descriptions the way Dina would later teach me to, though I didn't know that yet, plain and factual, no drama, just what happened and when. The screenshots of Nora's texts got their own folder, sorted by the day she'd sent them. The video of her collecting money got another, and I even trimmed the clips so the timestamp stayed visible in the corner of every frame, because a timestamp is a hard thing to argue with. When it was all backed up in triplicate, I did one more thing. I emailed copies to Dad directly. I sat there for a second, choosing the subject line, and then I typed it exactly the way I wanted him to see it in his inbox. Evidence, do not delete. I hit send and heard the little whoosh, and something Something in my shoulders finally came down half an inch. Now it existed somewhere he'd have to look at it. Now it wasn't just my word against her tears. An hour later, Nora knocked on my door. Not her real knock. She had two of them, and I'd learned to tell the difference the way you learn a stranger's footsteps in a house you share. Her real knock was fast and impatient. A couple of hard raps when she wanted something and thought no one was listening. But this was the other one. The fake, gentle knock. Soft and slow and careful. The knock she performed when Mom was within earshot and needed to hear how kind and patient Nora was being with her difficult, ungrateful foster sibling. "Can we talk?" she asked through the door, and even her voice was pitched for the hallway, sweet and a little sad, loud enough to carry downstairs. I opened it, but only part way, and I kept my body in the gap so she couldn't come in. I wasn't going to have her inside my room, near my console, near my laptop, near anything. She had her sad face on again, the one she could summon in under a second, the eyes going glassy right on cue, the corners of her mouth pulling down like invisible strings. "I was actually monitoring those kids to make sure they played age-appropriate games," she said. Her voice was steady, too steady, the words coming out smooth and even like she'd rehearsed them in the bathroom mirror before walking over. That was always how I could tell she was lying, when she got fluent, when the story came out too polished. "I was planning to tell Mom and Dad about the money and donate it all to charity for underprivileged youth." She said it so earnestly, looking up at me through her lashes, and I almost admired how quickly she'd built a brand new version of events out of nothing. In this one, she was a guardian, a chaperone, a saint quietly saving up cash for orphans. I just stared at her. I didn't say a word. I'd learned that too, that silence bothered her more than any argument, because silence gave her nothing to grab onto, no reaction to twist, no line she could take out of context and cry about later. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She glanced down the hall to check if anyone was watching, and when she saw the coast was clear, some of the softness slid off her face. "You don't believe me," she said, and it wasn't a question. I kept staring. The seconds stretched. "Fine. Be that way," she muttered, and the sweet hallway voice was gone completely now, flat and cold, and she turned and walked away, her footsteps losing all their careful gentleness the moment she thought the show was over. Later that evening, I heard Dad on the phone in his office. His office door was almost closed, just a sliver of light spilling out into the dark hallway, and I could hear the low rumble of his voice through the gap. He was calling the parents of the two brothers from our street, the quiet ones from around the corner who showed up in the footage handing Nora crumpled bills. He was asking about Nora's gaming sessions, keeping his questions careful and roundabout, the way adults do when they're embarrassed to be asking it all. His voice was professional, level, the voice he used for work calls, but I knew him well enough to hear what was underneath it. There was a thin thread of embarrassment running through every sentence, a tightness, like each word cost him something. He was a man who cared a lot about what the neighbors thought, and now he was on the phone confirming that the foster kid he'd been defending for months had been running a business out of our garage while we sat in church pews across town. I sat down at the top of the stairs in the dark, my knees pulled up, and I listened. I couldn't make out the responses on the other end, just the rise and fall of Dad's half of it, the pauses where he was hearing something, the little sounds he made when he was writing something down. Part of me wanted to hear a raised voice, an apology, some sign that the parents on the other end were confirming everything and that tomorrow it would all be settled. But no reply came that night. Dad hung up eventually, and the office light clicked off and the house went quiet, and I lay in bed with my stomach twisting, not knowing which way any of it would fall. At dinner the next night, Mom didn't even mention the money. Not once. Not the $10 an hour, not the neighbor kids, not the footage that had played on our own television in our own living room while Nora's mouth hung open. She didn't mention the exploitation or the texts, or the fact that a 13-year-old had been renting out my property behind everyone's back. Instead, she went on about how I'd violated Nora's privacy by setting up a hidden camera. That was the crime now. Not what the camera had caught, but the camera itself. "Privacy is sacred in this house," she said, and she said it in this calm, disappointed, almost gentle tone while she passed the mashed potatoes down the table, like she was teaching a lesson to a class that had let her down. "We don't spy on family members." I took the bowl and passed it along without taking any. I wanted to remind her about Nora's photos of the light under my door, the ones she'd taken to prove I was gaming when I shouldn't be. I wanted to remind her about the recordings Nora had made of my controller clicking from the hallway, the little audio files she'd presented like courtroom exhibits. Where had privacy been then? Where had the sacred rule been when Nora was crouched outside my bedroom pressing record? But I didn't say any of it. I knew exactly how it would go. I'd point out the double standard and Mom would say that was different, and then somehow within 5 minutes I'd be the aggressor again, the one who couldn't let things go, the one making everything harder for a girl who'd already suffered so much. So I just pushed food around my plate, dragging the fork through the potatoes in slow lines, not eating. Across the table, Nora sat there looking victimized. She'd perfected this posture, shoulders a little curved, eyes a little downcast, letting out these small sighs at strategic moments, dramatic little exhales that she timed for whenever the conversation drifted too far from her suffering. Dad stayed quiet the whole time, which was its own kind of loud. He kept his eyes on his plate and cut his chicken into smaller and smaller pieces, methodical, mechanical, until the pieces on his plate were tiny, and he still hadn't eaten a single bite. I'd never seen him do that before. It was like his hands needed something to do so the rest of him wouldn't have to say what he was thinking. "You could have just talked talk to us," Mom continued, softening her voice, reaching for that reasonable parent tone. "Instead of this ambush." The word ambush landed in the middle of the table like something dropped from a height. Ambush. As if showing the truth were an act of violence. As if I'd cornered them instead of finally, after months, defending myself. My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my temples, but I kept eating in silence, or pretending to, moving food from one side of the plate to the other, because I had learned that in this house being right was never the same as being believed. After dinner, I went back to my room, shut the door, and texted my friend from school everything that had happened. All of it. The footage, the passwords, the dinner, the word ambush, typing it out in a long, messy stream that got the whole day out of my chest and onto a screen where someone outside these walls could finally see it. I needed that. I needed someone who wasn't in this house to look at the situation and tell me I wasn't crazy. Because when you live inside something like this long enough, you start to wonder if maybe you are the problem, if maybe everyone else is right, and you're the one who can't see clearly. Their response came fast. First, a string of shocked emojis, the wide-eyed faces stacked up one after another, and then real words, paragraphs of them, and every single one of them landed like a hand on my shoulder. Nora's playing quite the game here, isn't she? Those tears about seeing all those other kids with bedrooms sound rehearsed when she's charging those same kids money to play the PS5 she supposedly can't bear to see. Reading it back, laid out plain like that by someone who wasn't tangled up in it, made the whole thing look as obvious and ridiculous as it actually was. She couldn't stand to see the console, but she'd stand in the garage collecting cash from the kids playing it. She was traumatized by the sight of privilege, but she'd rent that privilege out at $10 an hour. My friend saw it instantly. No camera required, no evidence folder needed, just the story told once. And then they offered to let me crash at their place if things ever got worse, said their parents wouldn't mind, said the couch was mine whenever I needed it. I read that part 3 times. I didn't plan on taking them up on it, but just knowing I had somewhere to go, that there was a door somewhere in this city that would open for me, made the walls of my room feel a little less like they were leaning in. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand, one notification after another rattling the wood. For a groggy second, I thought maybe something good had happened, that the truth had finally caught up overnight. Then I looked. Nora had posted on social media, a long post, the kind she wrote when she wanted an audience, all about being ambushed and betrayed by family who should support each other through difficult times. She didn't name me directly. She never did. She was too smart for that. But everyone knew. It was all there in soft, wounded language. The vague references to people who couldn't understand her trauma. The talk about how hard it was to feel safe in her own home. The little line at the end about staying strong no matter what. And it was working. The post already had dozens of comments, and I scrolled through them with my stomach sinking lower and lower. Kids from school I recognized. Adults from Mom's book club. Women who'd known me since I was small. All of them lined up in the replies telling Nora how brave she was, how strong, how they were praying for her, how family was supposed to protect each other. She had told her side before I'd even opened my eyes. She'd gotten out ahead of the whole thing, framed the entire story, cast herself as the victim and me as the shadowy betrayer. And by the time I was awake, the narrative was already set like concrete. I hadn't said a single word yet, and I'd already lost the morning. I grabbed my backpack and headed to school, and my stomach churned the whole walk there and didn't stop when I got inside. The main entrance felt different the second I stepped through it. Kids were already whispering, heads tilting together, eyes flicking toward me and then away. Some of them didn't even bother to hide it, just watched me openly and pointed as I passed, tracking me down the hallway the way Nora had tracked my console across the living room floor. Someone had shared her post in the school group chat overnight, and now the whole building seemed to know that something was going down at my house, without knowing a single true thing about it. I kept my head down and my shoulders up and made it through the first bell, sat through a period I couldn't tell you a word about. Second period had barely started when the office assistant knocked on the classroom door and handed my teacher a pink slip with my name printed across it. Every head in the room turned. I felt my face go hot as I stood up and took the slip and walked out, the whispers picking up again behind me the second the door swung shut. The counselor's office was down at the end of the hall. Dinah Nair was waiting for me with her door already open, and she gestured to the chair across from her desk, calm and unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. She pushed a box of tissues across the desk toward me, even though I wasn't crying, even though I was pretty sure I wasn't going to, and she said she'd heard there was some stuff happening at home, and asked if I wanted to tell her about it, and I did. Once I started, it all came out. I told her everything, from the beginning, from the crack house story that Nora trotted out whenever she needed a shield, to the $14 Christmas present, to the PS5 getting exiled from the living room, to my bedroom, to the basement, to the garage full of spiders and paint cans older than either of us. I told her about the footage, about the money, about the moment I'd connected my phone to the living room TV and watched Nora's face go white. She listened to all of it without interrupting once. She just nodded, slow and steady, and took notes on a yellow pad, her pen moving in even strokes. And something about the way she didn't jump in, didn't correct me, didn't rush to Nora's defense the way everyone at home always did, made it easier to keep talking. When I finally finished and ran out of words, she leaned back in her chair and set the pen down. She told me I'd done nothing wrong by protecting my property and documenting what happened. She said it plainly, like it was just a fact, not a debate. And I realized how long it had been since an adult had said something like that to me without a but attached. Then she pulled out a fresh folder and started writing down a plan. "Document everything with dates and times," she said. The same instinct I'd already had with the folders. And hearing her say it out loud made me feel like maybe I wasn't paranoid after all. Just careful. Set clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss with Nora. Don't engage when she tries to provoke me, because provoking me was the whole point, and a reaction was the only thing she was really after. "Keep copies of everything in multiple places," she said, and she actually walked me through setting up a cloud drive right there in her office, showing me how to organize it, how to make sure nobody but me could get into it. By the time the bell rang for the next period, that folder felt like armor. For the first time in days, maybe longer, I felt like I had some control over the situation, like there was a version of this where I didn't just have to absorb whatever came at me and take it. That evening, when I got home, I climbed the stairs braced for another fight, and instead I found Dad in my room. He was crouched down behind my desk with the PS5 in his hands, plugging cables back into the wall. He didn't say much. He never did. Not about the big things. He just told me, without turning around, that it was staying in my room from now on. No common areas at all. No living room, no basement, no garage. Just mine, up here, where nobody could take it away or move it or use it against me. He finished connecting everything, then pressed the power button and waited until the menu came up on the screen to make sure it was working, that nothing had gotten damaged in all the moving around. Then he stood up, and on his way out, he squeezed my shoulder, once, firm, his hand heavy and warm. He still didn't say anything. It wasn't an apology. He didn't tell me he'd been wrong, didn't mention the footage or Nora or any of the months behind us, but that squeeze meant something, and we both knew it, and I let it. Around 8 that night, Nora knocked on my door, the fake gentle knock again, the one for when the parents were listening. When I opened it, she had this practiced look of sadness arranged across her face, soft eyes, downturned mouth, the whole quiet performance. She said she was sorry for any misunderstanding and hoped we could share the gaming system like siblings should. Share, like siblings should. As if any of the last few months had been a misunderstanding. As if there were two innocent sides to the story that had just gotten crossed. I told her no thanks, keeping my voice flat and even, and I started closing the door. And that was when the mask slipped, right on schedule. She immediately raised her voice, pitching it to carry down the stairs so our parents couldn't miss a word, saying she'd tried to make peace, but I'd refused to forgive her, that she'd come to me with an open heart and I'd shut the door in her face. The last thing I saw before the door clicked shut was her expression, and it wasn't sad at all. It was calculating, already spinning the next chapter of the story she'd tell downstairs. 3 days passed with Nora giving me the silent treatment, which was pretty nice. Then Saturday morning, someone knocked on our front door while I was eating cereal. Mom answered it, and I heard Emmeline Kant's voice asking about money her sons had paid Nora for PS5 time. Mom's face went completely white as she realized the neighbors knew about the whole thing. Dad actually looked relieved to have someone else confirming what I'd been saying. Emmeline stood there with her arms crossed, saying her boys had paid $40 total and she wanted it back. Dad disappeared into his office and came back with his laptop, pulling up our home security system. He started checking the footage from all the Sundays we'd been at church, his face getting more serious with each video. There was clear evidence of kids coming and going from our garage, timestamps matching exactly with when we were at service. He turned the laptop toward Mom, showing her kid after kid entering our garage while we were gone. Mom kept trying to find some explanation, but even she couldn't argue with the video evidence. That evening, we all sat around the dining room table for a family meeting. Dad said Nora needed to pay back the money, and we needed to establish new boundaries around the gaming system. Mom immediately changed the subject to whether I'd violated Nora's privacy by recording her without permission. She went on about the ethics of surveillance and how I'd broken trust in the family. I was too tired to even argue anymore and just sat there while she talked. Nora sat there looking victorious while Mom defended her. The next week, Elisa showed up for Nora's regular social services check-in. She had this thick folder with Nora's name on it and a clipboard full of forms. Dad cleared his throat when she asked if there were any concerns to discuss. He actually brought up the PS5 situation, which made Nora's face go pale. I sat on the couch watching Elise write down everything Dad said about the garage rental scheme and the money Nora collected from the neighbor kids. Her pen moved fast across the paper while Nora kept trying to interrupt, but she held up her hand to stop her. Elise pulled out a different form and started creating what she called a behavioral contract. The part about Nora having to pay back the $40 to each kid got underlined twice. She made her sign the contract and gave copies to both my parents. After Elise left, Nora immediately started making excuses about having no money. Dad suggested she could get a part-time job at the grocery store that was hiring. Nora put her hand on her chest and said working would interfere with her trauma recovery process. The excuses just kept coming like a broken faucet that wouldn't stop dripping. Eden texted me that afternoon asking if I wanted to bring my PS5 to her house. Her parents had a finished basement with a huge TV, and they said I could come play whenever I wanted. It hurt having to remove my own property from my home, but the idea of not fighting about it every single day made the decision easier. I packed up the console and all the games in a duffel bag. Their basement had this soft carpet and a sectional couch that was way better than our spider-filled garage. For the first time in months, I could actually enjoy gaming without worrying about Nora's next meltdown. When I got home that evening, Nora was pacing in the living room. She noticed the PS5 was gone from my room and started yelling about me hiding family property. She She actually used those exact words like my gaming system belonged to everyone. Mom asked where it went with this concerned look on her face. I told them it was at a friend's house, and Nora's face turned red. She accused me of hoarding resources and being selfish with things that should be communal. The next day, I came home from school to find my bedroom door open and my lockbox sitting on my bed. Mom had gone through it while I was gone looking for the PS5. She confronted me in the kitchen about lying and hiding things from the family. I pulled out my phone and showed her the text thread with Eden from the day before, proving I had been transparent about moving it. The fact that she went through my private things without asking didn't seem to bother her at all. Dad came home that night with his phone in his hand, looking serious. The neighbor had finally called him back and confirmed their kids paid Nora $40 each over several weeks. He showed Mom the text messages, and she went quiet for once. Nora immediately claimed the neighbors were exaggerating, and it was only once or twice. Dad pulled up his banking app and showed a deposit of $80 from 3 weeks ago that matched the timeline. Nora's story kept changing every time Dad presented new evidence. At school the next day, I told Dina everything during lunch. She suggested I needed to practice setting boundaries with Nora. We spent the rest of lunch period role-playing different scenarios where Nora would try to engage me about the PS5. That evening, Nora started another one of her speeches about forgiveness and moving forward as a family. I looked her straight in the eye and calmly said my practice sentence about the console being at a friend's house and not discussing it further. She kept talking about healing and second chances, but I just repeated the sentence one more time. Then I stood up and walked out of the room without looking back. Mom called after me that I was being rude, but Dad actually said I handled it well. 3 days passed before I noticed my gaming headset was gone from my desk, where I always kept it. When I asked Nora about it during dinner, she just shrugged and said, maybe I lost it somewhere. Her voice had that fake, innocent tone that made my stomach turn. 2 days later, Elise showed up for her follow-up visit with a thick folder of papers. Her voice got serious when she told Mom that more problems could mean Nora gets moved somewhere else. Mom's hands started shaking as she signed the papers. That weekend, I heard Nora stumbling up the stairs at 3 in the morning. Her eyes were red and glassy when she passed my door. The smell of weed followed her down the hallway. Dad wanted to drug test her right away, but Mom started crying about how stressed Nora was. Monday afternoon, Dad's phone buzzed during dinner with a text from Emmeline. She said if she didn't get her money by Friday, she was taking us to small claims court. Mom's fork dropped onto her plate with a loud clang. Thursday night, Dad wrote a check from our family savings to pay back all the neighbors Nora stole from. $800 total, money that was supposed to be for our vacation. A week went by with this weird piece, and I was actually starting to relax until I went down to the basement to grab my old PS4 controller I'd left on the shelf. The thing was smashed to pieces on the concrete floor with the plastic casing cracked open and buttons scattered everywhere. Nora was upstairs watching TV when I brought up the pieces, and she barely looked away from the screen to tell me she'd stepped on it in the dark. The way her mouth twitched into this tiny smirk made it obvious she'd done it on purpose. Dad came home from work and saw the photos on my phone when I was showing him something else, and for once he actually got mad at Nora instead of me. He told her she had 2 choices: either pay me $40 for a new controller or do extra chores around the house for the next month. That night around 11, I heard shouting from downstairs, and then this huge crash that shook my whole room. I crept to the top of the stairs and saw a fist-sized hole in the hallway wall with drywall dust all over the floor. Nora was sitting on the ground with Mom holding her and rubbing her back while she fake cried about how nobody understood her. Dad stood there looking completely defeated. Elise showed up on Tuesday after Mom called her about the wall incident. While Nora sulked in the kitchen, she decided Nora needed anger management sessions twice a week. Sunday, we went to church like always, and Cordelia pulled Dad aside after the service to tell him she'd seen Nora behind the grocery store smoking weed with some high school kids who were known troublemakers. Dad's face went completely still when she told him, and I could see him finally starting to realize the Nora problem went way deeper than just the PS5 situation. Monday morning, my parents sat us both down for new house rules, but they were only for Nora, not me. No phone after 8 odd p.m., no going out without telling them where. Mom started daily room checks that same day and kept finding empty beer cans and cigarette packs that she'd throw away without saying anything. The next week, Dad surprised everyone by scheduling an intake appointment for family therapy. Nora acted like she didn't care when they told her, but later I saw her hunched over her phone, Googling things like how to manipulate therapists and what to say in family therapy to win. She left her phone unlocked on the counter when she went to the bathroom, so I quickly took screenshots of her search history before she came back. At our first therapy session, the therapist was this older guy who didn't react to Nora's confused act when he assigned homework, including keeping separate spaces in the house and tracking restitution progress. The new house rule they established was that my PS5 had to stay off-site, and Nora couldn't contact any neighborhood kids under 16. Within 3 days, Nora had already broken the rule by texting the Quiet brothers, and Dad actually followed through by taking her phone for a whole week. She used her laptop to post on social media about her abusive household and how her foster family was treating her like a prisoner. But the comment section turned into a roast session. Kids from school who knew the real story started commenting about how she'd been charging money for the PS5 and lying about everything. The public humiliation seemed to affect her more than any punishment we'd tried because she deleted the post within an hour, but screenshots were already being shared in group chats cats. When Elise came for her monthly review, she spread the behavior logs across the dining room table and told my parents she was recommending Nora be moved to a different placement. Mom started to protest, but Elise turned her tablet around and showed the whole record: the texts, the false accusations, the restitution she never paid, the search history I'd handed over. 2 weeks later, a different car pulled into our driveway, and Nora carried her bags out the front door without looking back at any of us. That night, Dad walked into my room, set the PS5 back on my desk exactly where it belonged, and for the first time in a year, plugged it into the living room TV downstairs. "Play as loud as you want," he said, and I did.